You know, today I was actually going to make a video about UFC media going into the fight card tomorrow in Des Moines, Iowa. But then I thought between the co-main and main event, half of those fighters don't even speak English, and the English-speaking fighters are relatively uninteresting. So I'm going to watch boxing. There was a pretty hyped up card that DAZN, Ring, all of the promoters in boxing, it seems like Golden Boy, they all put on this fight card in Times Square. It was outside, out in the middle of Times Square. It was pretty cool. I'm going to give my opinion on the event as a guy who watches a lot of MMA and rarely boxing, but boxing whenever it is a big enough card. I do watch Canelo events. I do watch Devin Haney events. I do watch pretty much all of the fighters who fought on this card tonight. If they were fighting individually, I tune into their fights. Also, other names like Terrence Crawford, I watch them fight, and I like heavyweight boxing too. We all do. And this video has been something that's really been living in my head rent-free lately. I saw this not even too long ago. This Ariel Helwani interview isn't even very old. Eddie Hearn, who's a huge promoter in boxing, he represents Canelo and other large fighters. He was talking about how MMA is a poor relative to boxing, and I'll let him elaborate on what he means by this.
It's a poor relative, but it's not their fault, really, what's happening. I'm sure people will feel like they could have done some things different. It's just a bit tired, isn't it? It's really down to the actual product, which is the fights. Like, if you said to me now, name me 6 UFC superstars, I couldn't do it. The problem is with UFC, they always want the brand to be bigger, their brand to be bigger than that of the fighter.
I think that Eddie Hearn is a waffle for going out onto a public platform and just dumping all over MMA like this, but he does make actually kind of a good point that MMA is a poor relative to boxing, and it is because of the business model, but I'm not sure if he just simplified it in the way that he wanted to explain that he did in this interview. Fighters are able to earn records and careers that they're able to be proud of whenever they retire from the sport fighting in the UFC. But the problem with the UFC is that the business model makes it so they rarely make enough money to leave cleanly without getting knocked out a bunch of times, and they never supersede the image of the UFC organization as far as popularity. They will never get bigger than the UFC itself, and that's the point that he made that I actually agree with. But boxing, I feel like pointing the finger is really not good for this sport. And the reason why there are more eyes on boxing is because of its seniority. It's been around for a long time. Checking out a fight has been something that people have done since before MMA was even conceptualized, in the 80s and 70s. In the 20s, there's black and white film of boxers fighting. So boxing has been around forever. Going to boxing matches is something that people have done for probably 200 years, like high importance people. And that's a large thing that helps boxing too, as far as its popularity and perception in the eyes of the public, is the fact that they do have very A-list celebrities that attend these fights. I think Karl Anthony Towns was at this fight. Just random dudes who are important at these events, and they don't show up to UFC events. So that's something that helps their sport grow, is that if Karl Anthony Towns will come, then another NBA star will come and sit in the audience, and that will help grow more eyes to the sport because they can post a reel of it. The only thing that I really vehemently disagree with him bashing MMA for is pointing out these problems with our sport whenever boxing clearly has its own problems with fight hype and also matchmaking too. And this is because there's no centralized promotion. You saw the fight banner before. We'll look at it again. How many different brands are on this poster? Who even hosted it? Who's paying for this? Are all of them paying for this? Who sanctioned this fight? If you want to say, oh yeah, it's a DAZN card, DAZN is only the video streaming service, so they're going to host the event's production, so yeah, it's a DAZN event because they're hosting the stream, but individual promoters are doing all the work and setting up the fights and getting them to the events. And the whole purpose of this is to put power back into the fighters' hands as individuals trying to make careers in this sport, but what you get is a bunch of padded records and often very stale fights. Sometimes with an excessive amount of hype around them, and then they just don't deliver at all. So this is my assessment of the 3 fights that I watched. Ryan was heavily favorited to win this fight after his performance with Devin Haney and Rolly's last few fights. Rolly's just been getting chinned, but he's been fighting down at a lower weight class. Rolly moved up to this higher weight class. I think it's 147. There's so many damn weight classes in boxing, so I don't even know if this is welterweight or... I think they were saying welterweight. It might be welterweight. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, please. But this looked to have helped his chin a ton. He was eating some pretty solid shots off Ryan Garcia. Check hooks as he was entering range, and a ton of jabs he was getting hit with, and he was wearing them pretty nicely. It didn't seem like they were bothering Rolly that much. Romero started working his own jab later on in the fight, and he was working to like the body really nicely with like this lead hook that kept landing, and it looked like Ryan Garcia was getting some wind taken out of him because he wasn't throwing that jab that I was mentioning earlier that much later on in the fight. Ryan throws a lead hook, and Rolly Romero parries it with his rear hand and then throws 2 lead hooks of his own, and they actually drop Ryan Garcia, and that was the most significant moment in the fight. Ryan Garcia gets back up, dusts himself off. His cornerman gives him some inspirational talks, and then he just loses the decision. And Rolly Romero gets that drop, and he's like, nice. I'm probably going to win this fight now. Let me just coast to a decision. And so the rest of the fight ended up being very boring. Ryan Garcia did a Sean O'Malley tribute with a walkout to that song Superstar. And he did the most Sean O'Malley thing ever, which was just let the guy that he was fighting win a decision in front of him while he watched him do it. And sure, he got dropped, so that was kind of out of his hands once he was on his back. There was no sense of urgency. There was no pace he was pushing, no relentless pressure, no big clubbing overhand. Rolly Romero was actually doing a lot of that. He was boxing really well. I respect Rolly Romero as a combat athlete because he comes from a judo background, and I always see him getting good work in sparring footage and him hitting the heavy bag, and it makes me want to see him win. It actually did kind of make me feel good to see him win this fight over Ryan Garcia as the underdog. As far as skills as a technical boxer goes, Rolly Romero seems to be with the best of them. It's just that he couldn't take a punch before. He had Matt Schnell syndrome. But it seems like moving up to welterweight or 147, whatever that weight class is called in boxing, has helped him out a lot. I am excited to see him get match made with other fighters on this card in the future. The second round of the last fight, and then the one after this one were really the high points. This was the most snoozy thing I've ever seen in my life. Devin Haney versus Jose Ramirez was a dumpster fire. If you saw this fight, I wish that both of us had the Men in Black memory eraser so we could just scrub it from our memories. I think we were better men before we saw this. This was a mismatch that heavily favored Devin Haney. Absolute nothing burger of a fight. Haney ran the whole time, and Ramirez's pressure was absolutely useless as well because he wasn't putting anything behind it. He was just walking into Devin Haney, and Devin Haney would just move on his bike across the x-axis and just plant and just drop a lead hook on this guy. And that was only at the very beginning of the rounds, too. And he looked super freaked out. The first 2 rounds of this fight were the messiest things I've ever seen. Devin Haney was so flustered to be in there, and the other guy looked like he was as well. And they were just initiating clinches in every single exchange. Throughout these clinches, Devin Haney would catch Ramirez with a heavy punch on a break, and that was enough for Ramirez to not enter into the pocket at a certain point in the fight because he didn't want to get clipped. But he only really took a couple of clean shots, but they did look hard. I will say Devin Haney does have some power, but he never goes first. Certain MMA fighters like Poatan, Dustin Poirier, even Michael Chandler, dude, they specialize in closing off angles on the cage, and Ramirez wasn't able to pin Haney and begin working his offense at any point in this fight. He was just following him around. He wasn't moving to where he thought he was going to be or trying to predict or read at all. He was just moving in a straight line either towards him or away from him. And it's not even like he was getting punished for it either. Devin Haney just saw this as an opportunity to either move more or less. The announcers were talking about how this fight might have produced one of the lowest outputs in any single fight that this organization has hosted. Whichever one we're talking about right now, since we've already established that there's 8 million different hands in this pot. If memory serves me properly, Devin Haney fought Kambosos twice, and I watched both of these fights. Devin Haney is a boring fighter, and it is impossible for him to be entertaining. And he wins at the cost of being a fighter that you want to see fight. And that's a problem for me as a fan of this sport and wanting to support a fighter like Devin Haney. Because what they're going to do is they're going to give him other pros who are going to lose out on opportunities to get knocked out by higher level fighters who can actually produce a finish highlight. So regrettably, he won this decision. It's not like he should have lost it, but I just really wish that he would have put his foot on the gas a lot more. Teofimo Lopez versus Arnold Barbosa Jr. was the first fight of the 3 that happened, and it really set my expectations for the other fights that followed it way too high, because this was actually a really good fight. Teo is a special fighter, and he put on a clinic against this undefeated pro with 38 fights. And I don't know who these guys are fighting to get these records, but there was a stark difference in the skill that was present in that ring. Arnold Barbosa Jr. did not have business being in there with Teofimo Lopez, even with his record looking the way that it does. Teofimo Lopez was faster than this guy. He was more powerful. He could take shots better. He jabbed this dude's head in half, and he was rocked at a certain point. I think it was the 4th round. He went down while throwing an overhand, and they both traded, and Teofimo Lopez's knees buckled. He paid for trying to put on a good fight, but it ended up paying off for him because he won this fight and he stole the show. He gets on the mic afterwards and he delivers a funny punch-drunken monologue, and this actually did feel like I was watching the UFC for a little bit. I knew Teofimo Lopez was a good fighter because I watched him rob Lomachenko, but he looked like the best boxer on the card tonight. So what I could surmise from this was basically that Teofimo Lopez is equivalent to a fighter in the UFC, and that Arnold Barbosa Jr. guy is a lot like a fighter from Bellator or PFL. And there's no way to really show this before they fight each other because these types of promotions don't exist. Dudes like Eddie Hearn may have problems with the marketing machine that the UFC is and how they promote and how they go about conducting their business. But something for me as a fan that's useful in there being a multi-promotion system in MMA is for me to be able to fairly assess the skill of each fighter based off of where they fight and how they're doing in each promotion. Wow, this guy has a good clip on the regionals. He should fight at LFA, Bellator, or PFL. And then he goes to one of these promotions, and then he fights and succeeds there. And you're like, wow, he should make it to the UFC, the premier fight organization in the world, where he will then fight the best fighters who are actively alive and breathing on this planet. And then you will be able to know, is this one of the greatest to ever do it that we are watching perform? There's no way to fairly assess that in boxing. To me, it makes the fights less meaningful for the fact that this guy, Arnold Barbosa Jr., may have just been a can. For all the times that he won, he may have just been fighting cans. And Teofimo Lopez is clearly a cut above the average fighter in this weight class at this level. So the challenge is then matchmaking Teofimo Lopez with fighters who will test him so that he can't just coast to a decision super easily. My closing thought is, I wish that they could jump for finishes. And I say this because imagine if Rolly Romero did not win his fight against Ryan Garcia and he had dropped him in the 2nd round and he wasn't allowed to just knee-on belly, ground and pound finish the fight. And I know that this is just fundamental rule breaking in boxing, but instinctually, whenever I see a drop, I'm like, oh my god, chase him down to the ground. And whenever he didn't do that, I was really confused because I forgot that I wasn't watching MMA for a second. Another thing that I have confirmed in my head about this sport is that you can never use a boxer's record to predict how they'll do against another fighter unless they have a shared opponent. Then you could be like, okay, well, they both fought the same guy. You could evaluate both of their performances to see how they will do against each other. And that's fair. But 1-to-1 coming from 2 different sides of the world and they both are undefeated and have each 30 fights, it's impossible to know who's better between the two just by looking at them on paper. This sport is also not really designed for finishes to take place, it feels like. Unless we're talking about heavier weight classes, especially not walk-off KOs. I feel like that doesn't happen whenever we're talking about 147. Terrence Crawford is one of the most prolific welterweights on the planet. Errol Spence was going to die standing before he was going to get knocked out in that fight, and that was a heavy amount of damage he was having placed on him. So I'm not going to act like boxing is an action-packed, but the action doesn't really progress towards a point where the fight ends most of the time. UFC is guaranteed action if you leave your stream running during the prelims for like 40 minutes. My conviction is that people are not casually watching boxing cards of this level of hype unless they really love boxing. And I might be lowballing the number of people that actually fit that bill, but what I find is whenever they over-promote events like they did tonight, these events rarely actually have anything behind them that makes them significant. It's always those fights in boxing that you don't even know are happening the weekends that they take place that end up being the best fights. Like whenever Francis fought, anytime that Francis fought, there was no promotion behind it, and those end up being really cool fights both times. All of Canelo's fights, there's pretty much no promotions behind him. I think that he's fighting tomorrow, and there's no cool commercial that they made for the Canelo fight tomorrow. And I think they were talking about that actually taking place. Gervonta Davis doesn't promote his fights at all. And sometimes those end up being brutal knockouts, which rarely come at those lighter weight classes, and he can do it. What needs to be established is that Eddie Hearn can talk however much he wants about high-level boxing and how it's just hanging its nuts over MMA and how much better it is and how dominant boxing is in the public media. This sport owes everything to Turki Al-Sheikh. Because without his money to fund these fights so that the fighters will actually sign on to the contracts, we'd have no sport of boxing. Because these dudes would just be, it would be a whole lot of this. Because it'd just be a whole lot of this. It'd be a whole lot of Arnold Barbosa Jr.'s fighting Teofimo Lopez's, and Jose Ramirez is fighting Devin Haney's. Imagine a league where all of the best boxers in the world joined, and every single one of their fights was significant. And there was one belt, and they fought in their weight class for one belt, and that was it. That's just an idea. I think it's a pretty good idea. And on the business end, it definitely needs to be worked out so that it works better for fighters and also the promotion so that the sport can grow more. But I think that we're actually doing not bad for ourselves in MMA. Eddie Hearn going on the Ariel Helwani podcast and talking like this isn't helping us out, man. And I think it's pretty lame for him to bag on MMA and the UFC, knowing that it's smaller than boxing, whenever he gets actually nothing from it. What does he get from this? Whenever it's not him paying these athletes to put on these fights, whether or not they're good. It's Turkey Al Sheikh. So, those are my thoughts. I watched this card. It was something to do on a Friday night. I think I'm going to take the night off from the gym, a little rest day. Like, comment, and subscribe if you made it to this point in the video. I will catch you fellas in the next one. UFC fights on tomorrow. Woo!